Rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Faiza Naqvi with the prayer that may Allah bless you all with long, healthy, blessed life and increase your tawfiq khair. Keep you all safe from all kind of worldly evil and bring peace on this earth, inshallah. Today the topic we are about to discuss is the current situation in Bahrain, and we will also discuss about the new world order which has been proposed by Rahbar Muazzam Ali Khamenei, and we will see what is current situation in Bahrain, why majority of the people have boycotted the elections, and what was the outcome, what are their demands, and what Pope Francis' visit has to do in there, and what kind of aims and objective he had with his visit. So we'll discuss it further in detail with our special guest today. We have a wonderful guest, Sister Sundasul Asad from Lebanon. She is journalist and, mashallah, doing a wonderful job as a journalist. And we have Brother Mohsen Sayyid Mohsen Abbas, who is journalist, analyst, writer, and researcher. So welcome to the show, and I'm really grateful and honored to have you both on the show. Thank you so much for being part of this show.
Thank you.
Sister Sundas, first of all, I'll start with you from the current situation in Bahrain. What's going on in there, and why do you think the people who are in majority over there have boycotted the recent election in there?
Okay, thank you, first of all, for having me in this episode. Uh, recently, the Bahraini regime has held an election which the majority of international human rights organizations and the Bahraini opposition described as sham elections. These elections are sham because those elections are means used by manipulated by this regime in order to show the world that, look, we are a democratic regime, we are applying a democratic process, while in fact this regime is a dictatorship. It's a regime that knows nothing about democracy, knows nothing about human rights. The elections have been boycotted by the majority of Bahrainis, both the Islamists and the leftists, because these elections are, first of all, held based on an unfair electoral process. The districts in Bahrain are not fairly divided. They are divided, unfortunately, on sectarian basis, which guarantees that the regime won the majority of the seats in the parliaments. In addition, that in the recent years, the Bahraini regime has applied the so-called political isolation law, which prevents around 100,000 of Bahrainis from taking part in the elections because they have belonged to any of the arbitrarily dissolved political associations, or among those who have boycotted the last two elections since 2011. And you know what happened in 2011, that the people at that time peacefully protested, demanding basic rights, demanding basic freedoms, but the regime has called for the Saudi troops to come and to suppress those innocent people and those peaceful people. In addition, that the regime already use and manipulate the votes of the politically naturalized, those who have naturalized for political reasons, for sectarian reason, in order to change the demographic. You know that the majority of Bahrainis are Shia Muslims, but the regime, in order to maintain its throne, it has worked relentlessly on changing the demographic, on obtaining most powers of this parliament. This parliament is a powerless parliament. It can do nothing because all the powers in Bahrain are in the hands of the king, the ruler of Bahrain. Whatever the king wants to legislate, it's only his right, because this regime doesn't respect the popular demands, doesn't respect the popular opinion. You know that in Bahrain, the normalization issue, which is the most critical issue now dissected in the country, is widely rejected by those people. Most Bahrainis reject normalization. If I don't exaggerate if I say that 90% of the Bahrainis reject normalization. But this parliament, this powerless parliament, has has done nothing, because it has no powers to reject. It has no power to say no to the king. The king has decided to openly announce its already normalized ties with the Zionist regime, without respecting what the people say. So the Bahrainis have boycotted the election in order to say to the international community, in order to shed light on the ongoing alarming crisis in the country, which the Bahrainis are paying the price. Most of their beloved ones are even in prison, including Sheikh Ali Salman, the top opposition leader, who's the most peaceful uh, leader of the uprising. Sheikh Ali was arbitrarily incarcerated for fabricated reasons, which are related uh, uh, to the crisis with Qatar. Also, we know that most of the Bahrainis, as I have mentioned, that they are even incarcerated or in exile. The Bahrainis today also, imagine that you are talking about an oil-rich country, but most of the Bahrainis depend on social insurance and are unemployed. They face of uh, a lot of crises, and these issues have been shed. Pope Prince, in his recent visit to Bahrain, has shed light on these crises, especially the issue of the death penalty, which is means used by the Bahraini regime in order to suppress the people, in order to silence those people. Also, the rampant sectarian marginalization, discrimination, which is uh, practiced against those people.
Hmm. Sister, I'll come back to you. First of all, I will move on to Brother Mohsen. How do you see the situation, Mohsen? There is one situation like we have seen recently in Palestine. There is a young child, 15 years old, which has been assassinated or killed or martyred, you can whatever you call it. And the other side, there is a chaotic situation ongoing around the globe, especially in Muslim countries. There are so many sanctions ongoing and things like that, and there are so much pressure they are trying to build up upon the nations. And in such a difficult situation, Rehbari Muslim has introduced or proposed a new world order. What is that, and what it is all about, and how would you relate that to the current situation we have in Islamic world, especially? And if you
Well,
want to
first of all,
comment on the situation with whatever sister has said, you may add anything to it as well, just in case.
sure. I mean, I've only a couple of comments on Bahrain, which Sister Saunders has really outlined in a very succinct manner in terms of the kind of the internal domestic situation and the whys and wherefores. But it's important also to mention that Bahrain is essentially a puppet state currently. Its leaders are despots who are imposed on the Bahraini people in the first place. They're Saudi. They have a Saudi heritage in the first place, these guys, and were put on by the British, if you like, colonialist or post-colonialist, imperial policy in that region. Since then, of course, they've maintained pretty much an iron fist control over Bahrain, and they house essentially the Fifth Fleet, the American Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. They also now accommodate the British Navy in a big way. So essentially, Bahrain is being used to advance Anglo-Zionist imperialist military power, and in that Persian Gulf region, particularly. That's one of its main purposes. The other purpose is really to, of course, loot and plunder Bahrain's wealth. I think over 30–40% of the so-called trade with Bahrain is in the hands of Britain. The British directly benefit from this, and also the British government supplies most of the tools and the implements and the training for not only torturing but also overseeing prisons and maintaining the despotic power. So all the surveillance industries, all the training, that largely comes from the British. The Americans are second players in Bahrain, it seems, but nonetheless, they are a united front. The Anglo-Zionist Empire is exactly who I'm kind of mentioning. So Israel, Britain and America are the primary supporters of this despotic regime, which wouldn't last 1 minute without their backup and their support. So the reality is that Bahrain is a victim yet again of post-colonial, what I call Anglo-Zionist imperialist hegemony in the region. It's suffering in spite of the fact that it was the only genuine Arab Spring uprising. All of the others, apart from arguably Yemen, I could probably add to this list, they were all engineered. And they were uprisings which were social media engineered, they were color revolutions, they were one of the first exercises of international level regime change, government change, essentially interfering in other nations' political makeup. So Syria, Libya, Tunisia, all of that, Egypt, it was all part of one big game, in which they used the algorithms to push what they called the Arab Spring. In reality, what really is existing in that region is the resistance, not an Arab Spring, but rather an Islamic revival, an Islamic revolution. And we see that in Lebanon, we see that in Yemen, we see that in Bahrain, we see that in Iraq. And what the Anglo-Zionist Empire is doing is desperately trying to suppress that resistance. They don't mind Arabs and Muslims that comply and do what they want, because they can loot their countries and loot their wealth, as with the Saudi Arabians. Donald Trump called it milking the cow. So milking Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Bahrain or any of these nations is the objective. Plunder is the primary objective. The second objective is to maintain Israel as the policeman in that region and to help it to achieve its ambition of the Odin Yinon plan, which is that from the river to the sea, i.e. from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, Israel must have a greater Israel. And that means Iraq, that means Syria, that means Lebanon, that means all of that region, even down to Egypt, arguably. Israel considers these territories as its own. So whilst it doesn't control all of them militarily or practically or directly, it only occupies Palestine at the moment. In reality, Jordan and all of these nations, apart from the Hezbollah resistance in Lebanon and Syria, and arguably Yemen, the rest of all the dominoes in that region are part of the Greater Israel plan. They're already in the grip of Israel and the Anglo-Zionist Empire. Bahrain, of course, doesn't want to normalize with Israel, resists even this idea of the Anglo-Zionist Empire imposing itself, and in spirit and heart and in minds is really with the resistance. But they've done something really unique. They've not taken up arms. Bahrainis could have taken up weapons, could have taken up bombing, could have started killing and doing so-called, what these Anglo-Zionists would have called terrorist activities. They haven't. They've been a peaceful movement, and yet, in spite of that peaceful movement, they faced torture, they faced bullying, they faced, as was mentioned earlier, geo-ethnic cleansing, essentially. They've had the whole demographic change that's been imposed on them. But you see, you can't put down the truth, and you can't put down what the hearts and minds of people feel and what they want. And so in the long run, the Anglo-Zionist empire is fighting a losing game in Bahrain, and more broadly, now coming on to your other introduction, that the leader of the resistance front, Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has made it patently clear that the revolution that was triggered by Imam Khomeini and his followers at that time, of which Imam Khamenei was very much an integral part from the outset, was committed to supporting the Mustadafun, the oppressed of the region. That was one of the fundamental pillars of the Islamic Revolution, not only to raise the oppressed in Iran, those who were suffering under the yoke of the Shah, who also was an Anglo-Zionist imperial puppet, but also for their region. They could see Ayatollah Khomeini's vision was clear, that there was an oppressed Western Asian Muslim world and beyond, and it was oppressed by who? The money mafias, the Anglo-Zionist empire, America, Britain, whatever you want to call it, whichever shape or form you want to talk about them. This is all one Dajjalic movement, basically. They are kind of like, tantamount to being Satanists who believe in all the opposite virtues, in spite of their talk of human rights and their talk of freedom and their talk of democracy. It's all rubbish. It doesn't apply. What they're really about is subjugation, plunder, taxing people with interests and money systems which will never allow them to come out of poverty or slavery, essentially, modern day slavery. And I think that what you see in terms of Ayatollah Khamenei talking about unipolar world order emerging. I mean, this is a very large subject, and we'll go into it, I'm sure, much more, but I'll give an opening salvo on it. The end of the unipolar world order and the re-emergence of a multipolar world order is what I think Ayatollah Khamenei has been consistently talking about. He's also talked about the second phase of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So these two things kind of have a bearing on each other. First of all, the Eurasian axis is something people need to obviously focus on. The rise of the East, the apparent rise of the East in terms of being financially more powerful, militarily more powerful, refers primarily to China and Russia, and the movement for a kind of an opposition to the power of the dollar, the power of the Anglo-Zionist empire, the Americans, and the Western apparatus. This is what it seems on the surface. Caught in between this struggle, this apparent struggle between the Anglo-Zionist empire and this rising, emerging Eurasian axis, is the Muslim world. That center of the world is West Asia. Whoever basically dominates and controls that part of the world, throughout history, it's been shown that they will basically rule the world. They will control most of the world, resources and politics and militarily. This is a historical reality. So at the moment, what Muslims are facing, what West Asia is facing, is this struggle, this flux, this world in flux. And in between it, the Islamic world has to make up its own mind now as to what it's going to do. Having spent probably the last 70 years plus, maybe even 200, 300 years in some instances, if you count the British colonial empire, they've spent it as slaves to Western hegemony. Even today, you can categorize most of the Muslim world as puppets and slaves of Western hegemony. But there is an option now with the Russians and the Chinese emerging. There's a possibility that they could side with the Russians and the Chinese, or there's a possibility that they could stand up together on their own, independently, to fight with their own sovereignty, to re-establish an Islamic approach to the world, to start representing the prophetic dream. This is what Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution represents. It represents an opportunity for Muslims to come back to their solutions, because there are fundamental differences between the civilizational aspirations of an Islamic world and a world which is based on neoliberalism. And this is what we're up against. There's a religion called neoliberalism, which is the informal, unsaid religion of Anglo-Zionist imperialists. It believes in LGBT, it believes in gender fluidity, it believes in feminism, it has beliefs. It believes in these things so passionately that they will punish people for not believing in what they believe. It is an evangelical, secular religion, if you like, and it is based directly, diametrically opposed to prophetic virtues and ethics, because they only know hypermaterialism. They want, they justify, might over right. They justify plunder. They justify surveillance and destruction of individuals' privacy. They justify robbing people and creating war and conflict. These are all the things that you can see going on in West Asia, around the world, and all of the trail, the money trail and the paper trails, go back to Washington, London, or Tel Aviv. These are three places. That's where they all go to. So Ayatollah Khamenei, and I'll conclude as my first half as an overall, Ayatollah Khamenei is suggesting an alternative. He's telling the Muslim world that, look, America isn't as powerful or as scary as you think. Look, we've spent 40 years and we've taken on this so-called superpower with the power of God. And we've stood in front of them, and we've liberated many oppressed nations in the region. We've given hope to many others, and we're still standing strong in spite of everything that this Anglo-Zionist empire does. And we want you all to go back, look at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, look at his values, look at the state that he created, look at the models that he built, and let's try and dream that dream again and bring that dream to life, because that's what the Holy Prophet would have wanted. And there is a roadmap for that, which perhaps I'll go into in the following questions answers, perhaps.
Sure. Sister Sundus, I would like to know what are the main, demands from the Bahraini people. Some of them, obviously, you have mentioned in start. And what was the reason behind the visit of that Pope, and what he wanted to achieve out of that, the Pope Francis, who visited recently in Bahrain? So, what he wanted to achieve, and what impact does it have on in the political situation there?
Okay, sister. Before answering your question, I want to relate something to which Brother Sayyid Mohsen has highlighted, which is in the eve of the elections, Ayatollah Sheikh Isa Qasim, which is Bahrain's top spiritual religious authority, and who himself has been oppressed by the tyrannical regime by leaving him stateless, and he's now in he's banished outside Bahrain. Ayatollah Sheikh Isa Qasim has highlighted why the Bahrainis have to boycott these elections. Ayatollah Sheikh Isa Qasim has warned the Bahrainis that this regime is deceiving you, is treating you like sorry for the statement, is treating you like animals, is treating you like slaves, is treating you just like you have nothing to do, just to obey him, to obey it, and to follow its orders. By deceiving you, by sometimes calling as they are now calling these normalization treaties, the Abrahamic treaties, and trying to deceiving the people by alleging that they are beacons of tolerance and religious coexistence. And for this reason, the Pope Francis visit was organized in order to try to deceive the world that this regime, yes, it respects religious ethnicities, and it respects the different cultural groups. Why, in fact, the indigenous people of Bahrain, who are the Shia Muslims, are being subjected to different range of persecution. They are marginalized in all at all levels. They are not treated equally. They are treated like third class citizens. They are treated as they have nothing, no rights to enjoy. They are duped in the media as being traitors, as being Iranians, as being Majus. A lot of a lot of defaming terminologies are used against them. So, what Ayatollah Shafisa Qasim has been trying to say to those people that it's your option. It's a peaceful option to perpetuate your peaceful opposition, your peaceful movement, is to say to this regime that we are not slaves, that we are boycotting this parliament because we have our own say. We reject normalization. We have our genuine Islamic identity. We don't have to follow the Wahhabi uh, ignorant identity. We don't have to be part of this Saudi regime. And as also said, Mohsen Abbas has mentioned that the Saudis has invaded Bahrain in 2011, just because the Saudis themselves have felt that if the Bahraini uprising, the success of the Bahraini uprising, and also the success of the and also this is the reason behind the war against Yemen, that these models will be, they fear that another models of the Islamic Revolution of Iran is repeated in this Persian Gulf region. So they suppressed the people, they incarcerated them, they launched the war against Yemen in order to maintain power in this strategic geographical site, just to maintain the interests of the US and the UK. And this is the answer about when many analysts or many ask why the UK and the US doesn't interfere to stop the persecution against the people. Those are part of persecuting the people. The UK and the US are part of persecuting the Bahrainis, the Qatifis, the Yemenis, all the people in this region. They don't want those people to resist. They want them to be their own subject, to be their own slaves, in order to maintain their power there, and to order to, because they doesn't care about human rights, they doesn't care about the freedoms, they only care, and this is now this makes them shows or reveal their hypocrisy. They care about the Iranian women. They want to free the Iranian women, while in Bahrain, a lot of women have been tortured, have been sexually assaulted, have been incarcerated, have been having their beloved ones in prison, in exile. They have been unemployed. Why they don't talk about the oppression exercised against the Bahraini women? Why they don't free the Bahraini women? Why they don't free the Saudi women? Because this shows their hypocrisy. Those regimes, those Anglo-Zionist regimes, also care about their own interests. They want the people in this region, the West Asia region, to be slaves, nothing more, nothing less.
That's rightly pointed out. So, starting from the same point, Brother Mohsen, when we come to like Anglo-Zionist regimes, or maybe if the Western world, they love to impose their belief system on us in terms of liberalism, feminism, or whatever you call it or name it, the way you mentioned it in the previous part. But when we try to follow our own values, for instance, even in their own countries, like sisters said in Bahrain, they want what they want. Obviously, when they talk about democracy, and democracy is what people want, so why they can't respect their like demands in that way, like the obviously people of Bahrain want something else, and the obviously political elite, which is the puppet of obviously Western Zionist, which is kind of colony for them, or maybe their puppet or something. So how do you see that hypocrisy in them? And I would also want to know some like what a new word Muslim order, the way Reverend Muslim has mentioned, and what are the parts of that new world order, and what are the pillars, or what kind of values it has inside it. Some of them you have mentioned, like it would obviously strengthen mustazifin or the oppressor. So how do you see that? We do have a caller as well, so I would take their call and then we'll move on to this question, Brother Mohsin. Assalamu alaikum, who is on call, and what's your question?
My name is Mohammed Nawaz from France.
Ji, Nawaz bhai, how are you? What is your question?
Everything is okay. My dear brother, long time I've seen Sayyid Mohsin Abbas and my daughter Samdas Asad. She belonged to Bahrain.
She belonged to Lebanon. She's a journalist.
I visit many times in Bahrain, many times for business. And I'm very surprised there is no liberty, no freedom in Bahrain. My brother there also, because I stay with mother for business too many times. But they are the Irani people I have seen and I met many times. They're not Irani. The majority of the Iranian, they're living in 90% in Bahrain, but they are national Bahraini. But I have seen no chance, no job for Irani people. They're not police, not army, but all this British and this American bastard, they all going, all the control, and anywhere. Anyway, I want to say that human rights must be recognized. Bahrain, what they're doing. But when I talked in human rights, they also Jews, and they also Americans. How can say? But no liberty, no freedom in Bahrain. I condemn this Bahraini government.
Thank you so much.
Minority government. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nawaz bhai. Thank you so much for your point. How do you see, Mohsin bhai, the points raised by Nawaz bhai as well as the question we were discussing earlier? So.
First of all, walaikum assalam to Brother Nawaz, and thank you for that contribution. Well, you see, there is a fundamental nature of imperialists, but the imperialism in our age, has probably the nastiest nature of all the imperialisms that have passed, because for one reason, it's like a sweet poison. It's a sugar-coated pill. It's not obviously poisonous to people. Sometimes it tastes quite sweet when they initially give you their sort of offerings, but you find that sweet soon turns into that poison, and the poison is one of essentially narcissism, poison of individualism, the poison of selfishness, greed, the poisons of divide and rule, the poisons of conflict, the poisons of using and manipulating others for one's own interests. These are just some of the almost the character flaws that you can quite easily attach to modern Anglo-Zionist imperialism. There's also a white supremacy there. There's an arrogance. There's a conceit. There's a sense that they have a right to rule the world. This hasn't gone away. This is all part of these are all parts of the symptoms of imperialist arrogance. And in fact, Ayatollah Khamenei calls it the global arrogance for this reason. He calls it a global arrogance, that they feel that this whole planet, this whole world actually belongs to them, and they can do exactly what they like. Now, those are some of the characteristics, the almost humanized characteristics you could place on this imperialism. But you see, also they have particular strategies and plans. They have a very clearly thought out strategy of how they go about doing these things to control the Muslim world in particular. And there's a particular reason, because all the things I've mentioned are diametrically opposed to the principles of Islam. Islam talks about family. Islam talks about the sanctity of motherhood. Islam focuses on the freedom of children. Or Imam Ali alayhi salam, you know, clearly says, treat children with the learning through play, and then build them up, give them all their skills, allow them to have all the opportunities and to be their friends when they grow up. Well, this system doesn't do that. This system, what it does is, even when it educates children, for instance, it wants ultimately for them just to be cogs in the work of the corporate machine or the state machine which they have imposed. So actually, it's not about the welfare of children or human beings or the subjects. The subjects basically are slaves, and even, I'll give you one word which everybody knows very well: mortgage. You know, you mortgage, you get a mortgage for a house here. What does that word in Latin mean? Mort means death, and gauge means grip, death grip. So even in their language of the economy, the central language of that they use with their central pillars, you know, all these kinds of things that they did of giving people supposed rights to ownership of houses or whatever, it was all really just part of the mechanism of this kind of beast of neoliberal political economics. And it's all being exposed now. But the thing is, because Islam opposes interest, because Islam opposes usury, because it opposes oppressive rule, because it champions the rights of human beings and individuals, because it fights for the balanced human, optimal human nature. You know, this is all going to be an absolute problem for neoliberalism at any stage, or these imperialists. Because if you empower people, if you say to them you can have a balanced life, if you want to create peace and harmony, if you want to work together, create a unified human society across earth, because what was the Ummah? The Prophet's Ummah was not just a load of Muslims. The Prophet's Ummah was meant to be the whole planet. Is meant to go beyond. The Ummah is not just restricted to a small bunch of Muslims. His vision was for the whole of humanity to become living in peace and with humility and with kindness and in service to the Creator who made this whole world. These people reject the Creator. They reject humanity. They reject civilization, yet they coat it in all those languages of the virtue ethics of the Prophet. That's why this imperialism is more dangerous. And you see, a lot of us drink the Kool-Aid. We love this Coca-Cola and the McDonald's and all the offerings. We love all this, and yet it's poison. We know it's poison, and yet we still take it. You know what's inside Coca-Cola. You know what's inside McDonald's. You know what Western democracy really is. You know that even the work systems that you go. If I live in Britain, for instance, with comfortable surroundings, with even an affluent lifestyle, what am I doing it on? I'm doing it on the basis of the plunder of the poor around the world, the exploitation and the plunder of the poor around the world. So what good is my luxury lifestyle, or even my comfortable lifestyle, or even the law and order that we have in Western imperialist nations? It's nothing to boast about, because it's done on the blood and on the torture and the tears of other people around the rest of the world. Whether it's destroying the climate, whether it's destroying people's lives, whether it's destroying people's nations, whether it's destroying motherhood, whether it's destroying children's lives, there is no empathy, no sympathy within this system for that. Yet they will come up sitting sweetly with you, and they will tell you that we are the ones who offer you humanity and civilization, and it's because of us. But look at all those Western, all those Muslim nations, and they're corrupt, and look at your leaders. Who places these corrupt leaders on the Muslim people? Who imposes the armies that make sure that those leaders stay in power? Who maintains the torture chambers? Who gives them the technology to spy and survey these people and keep them under control? Who keeps those countries illiterate? Who makes sure that even the basic health requirements for countries like Pakistan don't get put action? It's their puppets. It's the same puppets that they left behind after colonialism. They never left. They duplicated their own puppets, stuck them in power, and maintained them. Ayatollah Khamenei talks about the liberation of the Muslim world, or the entire humanity, from this subjugation. And he talks about it through Islamic unity. He proposes safeguarding of the interests of Muslim ummahs and the identification of what those interests are. He talks about nations coming together in agreement on the priorities and needs of today of the oppressed people of the world. He talks about discernment of friend from foe, to know who is your friend and who's your enemy. And he talks about unity in terms of implementing joint actions against plots of the global arrogance, which works relentlessly, might I say, to destroy the unity of Muslims, but also the unity of humanity. They work to destroy the harmony across the planet. 1.8 billion Muslims exist in the world. 62% of them live in the Asia Pacific region. In fact, 344 million live in Indo-Pakistan. You've got about 317 million Muslims living in West Asia itself, and a $5.7 trillion GDP combined of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Nations and whatever. $5.7 trillion. That's just the conservative estimate of what the wealth is that is floating around in this region. And at the end of the day, why is all of that wealth not used towards creating affluence? Surely that should create affluence in the Islamic world. Why isn't it doing that? Because it's the Anglo-Zionist empire with the money mafia, with the World Bank, with the International Monetary Fund, with the World Trade Organizations, with the United Nations, all these bogus institutions internationally set up, financed, funded, and controlled by the Anglo-Zionist empire that makes sure that the Muslim world can't get together, and in fact all of humanity can't get together. And if Imam Hussein or any of the Ahlul Bayt were here today, based on the principles that we know that they stood for and that they fought for, they would smash this Anglo-Zionist empire. They would stand against it. They would not stand for it. And anybody who calls themselves a Shia, calls themselves a Muslim, and either stays silent, doesn't at least in their heart condemn this empire, or doesn't actively stand against it in one shape or form, is part of that disease. They are part of the problem. So I think our responsibility to Ayatollah Khamenei and to Imam Mahdi Akhir Zaman is to do our bit, whether it's by raising good children that understand this evil that exists and to give them the alternative, or whether it's to actually fight on the front lines, as many shaheeds and many martyrs have done, and this resistance has given so many martyrs to the cause already. And I salute all the mothers, particularly, and the fathers who sacrificed their children, with their sons and their daughters on the field, while we sleep comfortably in our beds, pretending that we're great. We are great Muslims. We are not great Muslims if we don't stand up for the oppressed.
That's true, Mohsin bhai. Sister Sundas, I would move on to you now and would like to know what kind of religious freedom violation has been done, as some reports suggest, which has been happened in Bahrain, and what kind of political improvement is going on over there? What kind of improvement do you see, or how do you see that? Because we are just running out of time, so we just left with 10 to 12 minutes. So
Okay, before answering your question, I want to extend on an idea that Sayyid Mohsen has been discussing, which is the impact of raising children to resist this hegemonic empire. And what happened in the recent weeks in Bahrain was quite significant. That there have been a lot of messages sent from inside the prisons, from prisoners of conscience who were addressing their parents, asking them not to vote for this regime, not to take part of this regime, because they were saying that taking part in such sham elections is approving dictatorship, is approving oppressing ourselves as prisoners, yourselves, and our future generations. So it was quite significant when you see the impact of this, educating children and raising children to know their rights, to know that they don't have to accept tyranny. And this is the lesson that we have learned from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. That yes, we know that we have to sacrifice. Yes, we know that we have to pay high and dear prices. We may be imprisoned. We may be banished from our homelands. We may have to pay to have to endure sanctions, brutal sanctions. But we are determine our destiny. We can't say that we can't accept your hegemony, and this was the base and the core reason of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam revolution. It was a reform revolution. It was a reform not because Imam al-Hussein wants the throne, not because Imam Hussein wants his own interest, but he want to educate the nation, to educate the future generations that you don't have to accept tyranny. You have to resist, even if this may cause you to pay dear sacrifices and to pay high prices. It's your own destiny. You can shape your own destiny, and this is a basic lesson that we have to maintain it, and we have to note it and pay attention to it, which is as long as we facing those tyrannical regimes and the U.S. Administration policy against us, it's our duty, each from his position, is to educate these generations, as you know that we are all awaiting the advent of the Savior Imam al-Mahdi Ajallahu Farajah Sharif, and it's our own duty to prepare those soldiers in order to be able to walk aside and to talk along the path of this leader who's going to save the entire humanity from the rampant oppression that every one of us has been saved. So you were asking about the religious violations in Bahrain. When you talk about Bahrain, there are a lot of phases and forms of religious persecution. People, despite being the majority, as I have mentioned, they have been now the demographic has been changed in Bahrain because of the political naturalization. People are not being allowed even to practice their religious freedoms, which their ancestors have been exercising for years now. And here I must mention something which is quite important. That you know the well-known famous song Salam Ya Mahdi or Salam Farmandi, which has been known worldwide. Even the dictator Bahraini regime has stand against this song and prevent children from singing it in public places. Why? Why this regime fears the children singing for their their imam? It signifies something which is so important, that this regime knows that educating those children in such a manner, preparing them in this genuine religious uh, Islamic identity, it fears such regimes. Those regimes want our children to be watching Netflix, to be polluted with the ideas of feminism and all these ideas that have nothing to do with our culture. They want children to be baseless, to have no identity. It fears them to have solid children like those who have sacrificed their lives for uh, for preserving the identity of this nation, which is the genuine Islamic identity that stand against oppression, that doesn't accept oppression, and knows, once again I repeat it, and knows that this revolution or this uprising or these demands demand also high sacrifices, and they are ready to pay these sacrifices because there are schools of Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam and Imam Hussein school, which have taught us how to stand against oppression and how to persist on demanding our rights whatsoever.
Thank you so much, Sister Sundas. Mohsin bhai, just last 5 minutes are left, so I want you to like shed some light on this beautiful quote, proverb, or whatever it is. I don't know, but it really touched my heart as well. In some way, you would understand why I'm saying that. Like 85% of people on Earth are the followers. 10% are the leaders or the creators or manipulators, and 5% are the observers. And the followers need something to follow or believe, so the creator capitalized on that and take advantage of their desire to be led. So that's it. Don't you think this is something which is happening? And in your previous comments you also mentioned all the things which is whatever is going on in the Muslim world, especially even on a humanitarian perspective, we can see that. But why the 85% of the population is not resisting, or is it resisting enough to make that noise that could stop such leaders who are ruining the peace of this world, and who are like you can say oppressing and suppressing the humanity through their strategies, through their hybrid wars, through their velvet revolutions, through their different kind of tools and strategies they are using to manipulate the whole world. And it's not just the price Muslims are going to pay, it's the price which is whole humanity is going to pay and is paying. So how would you comment on that, and how do you see the political awareness perspective which has been expressed by Rebbe Mosem as well in his recent speech somewhere, like youths should be aware of, like politically aware, how much significance does it have? So we just have left with 5 minutes, so now you have to conclude everything.
Sure. Well, it's a great question because it'll also lead me to hopefully give some hope at the end of it. Political illiteracy, economic illiteracy, spiritual illiteracy, cultural illiteracy, psychological illiteracy. These things are all rife within society, and they're rife for a reason. Again, that Anglo-Zionist imperialism, that neoliberalism, which has taken a grip of the world for decades, if not longer, has in the education system planted something very, very dangerous. What they've done is they've created an education system in which people are taught to memorize, but they're not taught to think. They're taught to regurgitate information, but they're not taught to reason analogically. They're taught to study and go to take knowledge, but then they're given a restricted set of textbooks from which to study. And everything that's done on that conveyor belt of education is actually designed to dumb people down in terms of those political, psychological, emotional, creative intelligences. And yet what we do is sleepwalk into this education system as if it's our liberation. Now, what they do is the ability to think critically and reason is one thing that doesn't actually get given, because you don't pass exams for doing too much of that, to be fair. Most of it is just memorizing and then passing that information, and you get a tick box and you pass the exam. In reality, Islam and the Quran stands very diametrically opposed to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't think there's hardly a single page in the whole of the Quran which doesn't encourage human beings to ponder, to reflect, to think, to reason constantly. You could look through the Holy Quran. Other than ethics and morality, it tells you to use this reason and this intellect and this ability to be able to work out right from wrong,